Okay, we're live.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this Tech Forward webcast this morning. I'm Jake Ward. I'm the president of the Connected Commerce Council. I'd like to thank our co-host, the Progressive Policy Institute, for hosting this event with us and for everybody joining us. We're going to have two pretty interesting panel discussions this morning, as well as we're fortunate enough to have State Senator Jack Johnson here as well. Senator, we'll get to you in just a second. Before we jump in, let me give you some context for this discussion. The Connected Commerce Council is a nonprofit, nonpartisan small business group based in Charleston, South Carolina, with sort of an advocacy mission and a resource mission for small businesses, which puts us smack dab in the middle of a number of discussions right now, including antitrust, the role of technology for small businesses in a world governed by the pandemic, and what we can all do as technology stakeholders to help write better policy and to make those rules and regulations work for small businesses and their customers. But before we get into the details of those discussions, why don't I start us off with State Senator Jack Johnson. Senator, if you wouldn't mind.
Great. Thanks, Jake. And I appreciate you having me on this morning. I'm very excited about this council. I think the timing of it could not be more appropriate given what's going on in our economy, and certainly we're in a period of change and transition, I think, to put it mildly. I'm very proud here in Tennessee, and what I thought I'd do is just take a couple of minutes to just give everyone kind of an overview of the Tennessee government, our General Assembly and our governor, and kind of where our priorities are as we navigate through the pandemic, through challenging economic times, and where I think a council like this and what you're trying to accomplish is so incredibly valuable. You know, pre-pandemic, coming into 2020 in January, early February, Tennessee was a rocket ship. Absolutely, we had unquestionably the best economic situation our state has ever experienced. We had record low unemployment and that's across all demographics, minority, women, all age groups were experiencing the best economic times that they ever had. From a fiscal standpoint, Tennessee has always been a very fiscally conservative state, but really, again, pre-pandemic, we were I would put our fiscal situation up against just about any other state in the nation. We had about $1.4 billion in our rainy day fund. Tennessee virtually has no debt. We are, in fact, the least indebted state in the nation. If you're a Tennessee, it's the lowest in the nation, your county and so forth. But in terms of your state debt liability, it was and still is the lowest in the nation. Depending on how you measure the metric, we're either probably the third or fourth least taxed state at the state level out of all 50 states in the nation. So we had AAA, still have AAA credit ratings across the board with all the rating agencies. And our small business growth was the fastest in the nation. So again, in a very, very good, strong fiscal condition. Well, then, of course, COVID happened, and that's been challenging for us as it has many other states. The good news is, because of our very strong fiscal condition that we had coming into the pandemic, it's enabled us to, I think, weather this storm better than a lot of states. We typically convene our legislative session in January of each year, the second Tuesday in January. So we were off to the races with our legislative session earlier this year. Then obviously we had to adjourn, go home because of the pandemic. Then we came back. And then later we even had a special legislative session to deal with some issues related to the economic climate as well as COVID. So kind of a quick update, our revenue collections are exceeding expectations. We base our budget on budget forecasts. So we look ahead. We have what we call a funding board that looks at economic conditions and tries to ascertain what type of economic growth we'll have. And we use those numbers, and we're very conservative with those projections. And that's how we base our budget. We do, of course, have a constitutional requirement to balance our budget every year, and we do so. So as we've weathered this pandemic, certainly we've taken some lumps, as every government entity has, state, local, federal, it doesn't matter. But because we were in such a strong fiscal position, we were able to position ourselves, I think, to not only weather the challenging times, but be in a good position to come out of it. And that's what we're seeing right now as our economy starts to open back up. Obviously, there are challenges, particularly with some of our small businesses. Tennessee relies heavily on tourism and hospitality, and those have been some of the hardest hit areas, particularly in some of the metropolitan areas in Tennessee. So we're watching that very closely, but trying to get some of those businesses open back up. One of the things that Governor Lee did when we began shutting down businesses to try to flatten the curve, as you remember the saying went, is he formed an economic recovery group, which I serve on. That economic recovery group is made up of business leaders from across the state and all types of business sectors, everything from hospitality, hotels, to trucking, to retail, healthcare, you name it. If you're involved in the Tennessee economy, there was representation on that economic recovery group. And that's, in fact, we have a meeting later today. And that's been the group that's kind of been advising the governor and trying to provide some type of parameters to help businesses navigate, help disperse relief, whether it's from the CARES Act, federal money that's been coming down, the PPP loans, and that type of thing. So again, I view it as we are hopefully in transition now of coming out of the pandemic and the economic shutdown. We're obviously very closely monitoring cases and spikes in cases when they're occurring, trying to get our schools open back up so we can get kids back in school. But if things go as we hope and we continue to put this virus and the pandemic behind us, I think Tennessee is very, very well positioned. And again, as I said earlier, I really wouldn't want to change our position of where we are right now with really any other state in the nation. I don't mean to pick on states like California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, but those states were in pretty bad economic, in a bad economic situation before the pandemic. And then it certainly pushed them over the edge. And so I really fear for our friends that live in some of those other states. You had businesses that were fleeing those states, coming to states like Tennessee, Texas, Florida, that have a more favorable business regulatory environment and a more favorable tax structure. That was already happening, and we've only seen that accelerate, which again, I think adds fuel to the fire that Tennessee is in a really, really good, strong position to recover from this. So when it comes to small businesses, mom and pops, and as I understand this council, the objective is to try to help facilitate use of digital technologies for those smaller companies, well, not necessarily just smaller companies, companies in general, to help make them more productive and more efficient. And I think that's such a key part of our economy and growing our economy. Before I became majority leader of the Tennessee State Senate, 2 years ago, I chaired our Commerce and Labor Committee, which is effectively the business committee, handles all the business legislation for Tennessee. And I chaired that committee for 9 years. And I still serve on the committee. And that's really kind of the tip of the spear in trying to make sure Tennessee is hospitable to businesses. I joke sometimes that it's not a joke, but rhetorically, that we have a big neon sign at the state line that flashes and says, we support capitalism, we support businesses, we don't think profit is evil. We like companies to expand and grow and relocate to Tennessee. And we're going to continue to have that neon sign flashing at the state border saying, we welcome you in Tennessee, and we want you to be here. In closing, I will say this: it's going to be a busy time from now until we will reconvene our next legislative session in January, but work is already underway on legislative initiatives. I had a fairly lengthy meeting my staff and I did yesterday with the governor's staff. As majority leader, I'm the sponsor of all the governor's legislative initiatives in the Senate. And so we were going over his legislative package for the coming legislative session in 2021. And I can tell you, it is chock full of really trying to keep our foot on the gas in terms of Tennessee's economic outlook and growing our economy moving forward. So for everyone participating in this council, thank you for doing that, and thank you for the folks that have put it together. And I will say I have an open door anytime. Look me up. I'm easy to find. Just Google Senator Jack Johnson and you'll get all my contact information. And don't hesitate to reach out, because as majority leader, I certainly want to work with our governor and other leadership in the Senate and the House to make sure we're doing everything possible to keep Tennessee hospitable to the private sector. And that's good for everyone. We'll get that unemployment back down and get our economy growing again. So Jake, thanks for the invitation to be a part of this. I'm grateful for that and grateful for all you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome, Senator. I suspect that people are fleeing the Northeast for the same reason I did. It's better weather and better food. Southern hospitality is it's just as good as capitalism everywhere.
It definitely is, and again, I wish no ill will. I'm an American. I'm a Tennessean, and I don't want any state to suffer. But I really do look at some of the economic, fiscal scenarios and some of these other high tax, highly regulated states that I just don't see how they come out of it. I hope they do, and I hope we can all prosper. But if folks are looking for a state to come and do business, we're going to be welcomed and celebrated, and you're going to have a cooperative state government and governor. Tennessee is the state.
It won't surprise you, I suspect, Senator, to know that in a fairly large research project that we did over the course of the summer and published 2 weeks ago, that Tennessee was in the top 5 in terms of revenue lost. Only 8% year-on-year revenue loss in the first 6 months of the year, compared to 16% as the national average. We believe, as that correlates to categories that we established, that's due largely to the investment of small businesses throughout Tennessee in digital tools and services, and being able to take their businesses online and maintain steady revenue, steady employment, steady payroll throughout the early phases of the pandemic. So congratulations for all that you do for small businesses. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Let's jump right in now and hear a little bit from so small businesses themselves, as well as the Chamber of Commerce. Let me see if I can get my screen to work here. Nell Kedro from State. Nell, are you there? There you are. As well as Kim Baker from the Chamber of Commerce in Gallatin are joining us to talk a little bit about your business specifically and the things that you've done, as well as what your members' businesses are doing sort of amid the pandemic and as we prepare to get sort of build forward to road to recovery. Before we jump into the questions, why don't we take a couple minutes and introduce yourselves, Nell, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, my name is Nell Kedro, and I own Estate, which is a boutique in Knoxville. We are a luxury women's boutique with contemporary styles for really anyone ages about 16 to 75. Our customers are a huge range. We carry a number of different brands at different price points for clothing, accessories, shoes, and jewelry.
Wonderful. And Kim, can you tell us a little about your about the programs you guys are running out of the chamber, as well as some of your members?
Absolutely. So I'm Kim Baker. I'm the CEO of the Gallatin Area Chamber. If you're not familiar with Gallatin, Gallatin is about 23 minutes north of Nashville. We are in Sumner County, Tennessee. And as Senator shared, we are feeling that rapid growth in Middle Tennessee, and 2020 really hasn't slowed Gallatin down too much. But we have, we're made up of about 600 member businesses, many of which are small businesses, and like a lot of you have definitely felt some changes this year. So we have a lot of programs we run normally, and then of course this year we didn't slow down. I like to tell everybody that we didn't close or cancel anything, because the chamber stays open for business because we need to be open for you guys. But we added a lot of new programs, which I think we'll dive into, and some were related to technology, and then some were just related to connectivity and making sure everybody was connected with each other during this time.
Yeah, so for context for everybody joining us, but also to set up this conversation, I started 3C almost 3 years ago because my experience in politics and public policy led me to have some firsthand experience in that technology is the silver bullet, right? It's the thing that enables small businesses to scale, to be secure, to reach larger audiences, and to make choices. It gives us the agility that we need to be successful. And I never imagined that the hypothesis would be tested quite this quickly, but here we are. And amid the pandemic, where hundreds of thousands of small businesses have closed their doors, millions more have transitioned from brick and mortar to purely online presence. I wonder if you guys could tell us a little bit about your experience, the experience of your members in terms of adopting new programs, new technologies that provide you market space. Now, for example, were you sort of buoyed by your use of technology with your existing customers? Did you need to adopt new platforms or new tools to sort of bridge the weird new world that we were living in?
Yeah, so we thankfully went online in summer 2019. So we were super thankful when this came around that we already had that set up, because alone it was a huge process to even get the shop built out into our website.
Sure.
And we use like a lot of social media platforms. We engage a lot with our community and customers, and also brands through Instagram and Facebook, and sell a lot through that. And our website was more, we sold through our website, but a lot of times it was people coming in saying, I just saw that you got this in on your website. I wanted to try it on in store. Yeah, so this was a test of like really pushing the website, pushing sales to our website, when originally our website was kind of pushing in-store sales. So we really had to, find more ways to market our website. And also we use tools within our website. One of the big things that kind of kept money flowing for us through COVID was we started creating these, we called them happy boxes, but boxes that people could fill out a form and we would make a customized gift box for them to give. And it worked out that Easter was in that time and people weren't able to get into stores. And we were shipping boxes to Alaska of customized Easter baskets and all across the US, which we couldn't have done without the tools we had built out in our website during that time. And I did have a few friends who have stores in the area that weren't online yet, who tried to start the process in April. And obviously it was super discouraging because that doesn't come overnight. But that was one tool that we were super thankful to go ahead and have.
You're what we would classify as a digital driver. When we think about small businesses, there's drivers, adopters, and maintainers. And adopters are people who, in a crisis, say, I need an e-commerce platform. And maintainers are people who say, I'm just going to shut down for a little while. While drivers are frequently those small businesses that have incorporated digital tools ahead of time. They have the agility to transition. They're able then to think about happy boxes, right? Because that becomes an option that isn't sort of backed up by hours and hours and hours of work. It's a cool marketing thing that you can do. I wonder how much of what you've learned and what you have taken from the past 6 months you plan to incorporate into the future. What does this mean for your business as you go forward?
Yeah, so that was super interesting. So when we did the Easter baskets and then we were reopened Mother's Day, people were continually asking for that option. And then we've continued the boxes through the summer for birthday gifts, and even some people are like, I just need to make somebody happy right now. So we'll get them together and in Knoxville we'll deliver or ship them out. But we're about to come out with a new idea of a different box every month that you can give people. So it is something that we're continuing throughout. And a lot of people, quite frankly, aren't comfortable getting out at this time anyway. So it really has been something that we've adopted and will continue to use, hopefully well past the pandemic.
That's great. That's great. Good job. Kim, you mentioned earlier that the Chamber has adopted new programs. I assume that you mean most of those being virtual and as a resource that provides tools and services to your members, but also a community aspect. For 3C, one of our most popular programs over the past 6 months has been a weekly happy hour. We get a couple of dozen members together every Wednesday afternoon and just sort of, how's it going? What are you dealing with? And that became a nexus for a lot of folks to find PPP loan applications or grants and programs throughout the state. And that community was incredibly important for my members. I suspect it is for yours as well.
Yeah, and so we're a really community focused organization, and so that was really important to us. Yes, we need to keep the businesses connected, but we also needed to keep that community spirit alive. And like you were talking with Nell, one of the things we did early on in March is when we knew it was, I think it was like the second week in March, we saw it coming. We're like, we know it's about to happen. And I think a lot of my chamber friends kind of went to sleep, like across the country. They just kind of said, we're going to check out for right now. We don't know what we're going to do. We said, we got to get to work. So we actually created a small business task force. And speaking of those drivers, we pulled those drivers. We identified those folks that were already using technology and using it well. And we pulled a couple from each sector within our membership. We pulled them together and we said, okay, we need you to help the other people because you guys are going to be okay. We know that. We need to figure out how we can help everybody else. And so that was, I actually get chills when I talk about it, because to watch businesses come together and instead of compete and just lean on each other, we had some that were really great at doing online sales. We've got a boutique on our square in our downtown that they do weekly Facebook Lives, and they've been doing this for forever. And they roll out all of their new products and they show it. And so I had them take their equipment, and we loaned some of our equipment too, and went and helped a lot of the other boutiques figure out how to do that and get that going. We knew that they couldn't build out an online marketplace website overnight, like Nell said, that just doesn't happen. But we knew that we could help them figure out how to use Facebook Live, Instagram, Google Forms, like to do a quick order form, and then PayPal. And so we spent a lot of our time, my team kind of divided and conquered and did a lot of that. So really bringing those folks together. We've done a lot of virtual stuff too. We started doing some happy hours like you did. That was really fun. And then we rolled out what we called the C Show. I started doing that, I guess, every day through March and April. Every day at 10 a.m. I would get on and do a Facebook Live. We use StreamYard, which is a great service you can subscribe to. They have a free and a paid version, and you can stream, and you can actually screen share with up to 6 people on your screen and stream live to social media and your YouTube channel, or you can just do 2 people. So we did that, and I'd bring on guests that were relative to business and then sometimes relative to the community, like director of schools and things like that. After about 2 months of doing that every day, that got exhausting for me, so we switched to 2 days a week. But our values are support, educate, and engage, which is why we came up with C. So that was really neat, just to keep everybody really connected during that time. And it also allowed the community to see what our businesses were doing and then also what was going on. There's one more thing I was going to mention. We launched an Open in Gallatin page. And I will say, I'll put my chamber hat on, and I know that this is a really great organization to stay connected with other business owners, but being a part of your own chamber and your community is important too. And I would hope that you could say that your chamber was doing things like this too. And if they aren't, tell me, and I want to talk to them, and let's figure out how we can make it happen. But we launched an Open in Gallatin campaign, and we put up billboards all over the city. And we created one landing page on our website where it was in addition to everything else we have, but it was strictly like COVID focused. So we had all the COVID resources that were coming from the governor's office. And then we also had a list of all of those restaurants. We had icons if they were doing carry out or dine in or just a different delivery, and then our retailers. And then we also started adding the grocery store hours, because as you remember, if anybody is still remembering back to March what grocery shopping was like, we kept all of that out there, and we're tracking the senior hours. And we kind of I don't want to say we threw membership out the window for a couple months, but we kind of did. It was no longer about just our members surviving. It was about our community and all of our businesses thriving and figuring out how to work together. So that we just kind of eliminated the membership thing for a couple months, and then we followed back up and said, hey, we're glad we could help, but yeah.
So I think I know the answer to this question in both directions, but it's keep in mind that there's a lot of small businesses on the line, and this would be really valuable. What advice would you give them in terms of the lessons you've learned, in terms of the experiences you've had? What in theory, we're nearing the end of this, right? Or at least the last quarter of the end of this. March feels like it was 35 years ago, but we're getting there. What counsel would you give to small businesses on the call today? Kim, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I think 3 really come to mind quickly. And One of them would be tell your story. Don't just tell it now, always tell your story and use your outlets to tell that. And that's not just about your products. Let them know that there's a person behind your brand and your business. We actually started through this. It's called Gallatin Grub. It's about food, but every Tuesday we do a grin behind the grub feature. And so we're featuring the business owners behind the restaurants. We talk a lot about their products and their food and what we love, but don't forget to tell your own story. And you can tell that. And I think that's really important for folks to know who you are. The second thing I would say is get to know folks within your industry, within your community. You know, don't be afraid to talk to other retailers or other, you know, whatever kind of business you are. Talk to people within your industry and idea share. Because what we learned and what we're launching in January is small business roundtables, and we'll be doing those. We'll be doing one a month, bringing industry-specific groups together and just helping facilitate that. And the third is just to show grace. I think show grace to yourself, but also your customers and just everything. You know, it's okay to fall as long as you get back up.
Great. Thank you very much. And Nell?
I would say, first of all, to be open to pivoting and understanding that the way you've done things all along isn't probably going to work right now. So be open to new ideas and listening to other people's ideas. A lot of people throughout the pandemic gave us ideas of things that they thought might work for us, which was helpful, and we were open to those ideas. And then I would say being able to read your customers. One thing that I tried my hardest to do throughout, I joked that I worked harder in April to get 50% of our sales than I have ever in my life, but being available to customers and meeting them where they're at, because there were some customers during that time who wanted us to drop stuff on their porch. And even after, we have customers who live in Knoxville who will go online and shop, and then will have us drop it at their front step later in the day. So just being open to what your customers need and communicating and just really being available. Because the last thing I knew when the pandemic started, that we could either take the month off and sit and let everything be still, or we could work really, really hard to keep it going and keep connecting with our customers. And I think that showed them that we were there and that we needed them to survive. So I think we're really connecting with customers and pivoting and being ready when they are.
Thank you. That's great advice. Now, one of the real points of optimism for 3C and for our members, and I think for everybody, is the resilience of American small businesses that both of you personify, right? The agility to move and pivot, certainly, but also to be willing to adjust to the expectations of our customers, to show grace in the way that we experience their frustration and fear, which there was a lot of, right? But the resilience of American small businesses is shining through every day, and it's promising. So with that in mind, why don't I pivot over to Alex Stapp from PPI and Justin Owen from the Beacon Center, talk a little bit about what it is our policymakers, state and federal, should be doing to support these incredibly resilient small businesses. One point of frustration that I have, full disclosure to everybody on the line, is that businesses are doing the best they can. They're doing incredible work with less resources and a lot of uncertainty, which, as you guys know, is really the biggest threat to all small business instability. Federal policymakers acted quickly to put the first round of PPP money in, which was great, as well as the second. SBA and Small Business Administration did the best they could under very trying times, trying to get that money out to folks. But now that we are in what feels like the final throes of this thing, and that we're adjusting, and that the digital transformation for both the expectations of users as well as small businesses responding to their customers are in place, policymakers are nowhere to be found on the positive side of the ledger. And in fact, they may be creating more instability with a number of things, including antitrust lawsuits, a House Judiciary investigation resulting in something coming out today, maybe. And so I wonder, and I pose this question to both of you, take it in any direction you want to, what is it that policymakers can and should be doing to support what we call the digital safety net, which is this idea that small businesses that utilize digital tools as fundamental to their businesses were more likely to sustain business and to survive the initial phase of the pandemic, whereas non-digitally empowered small businesses failed pretty quickly and many of them went out of business. How should government expand that digital safety net? Al?
Yeah, I'll go and start with that one. So I think, well, first on that, how can we help them? The Director of Technology Policy here at PPI, but I'm familiar with the more fiscal policy questions as well. And I think we just need more support for small businesses and for individuals and state and local governments. And so a phase 4 deal coming out of Congress would be really helpful right now. Local governments are cutting a lot of jobs, teachers, firefighters, police officers. Those are people who have money and spend money at small businesses. And so those are customers that they're losing out once they lose their jobs. We need more loans for small businesses that need to stay in business without the usual revenue levels. And we need continued elevated unemployment assistance for people who have lost their jobs and can't find new jobs because there are not enough jobs to go around right now. And not until the virus is completely suppressed will there be a true resurgence of business. So across the board, we need more support for individuals, state and local governments, and small businesses. And then in terms of the other side of the ledger, what can we do on regulations or these like House report, DOJ, state AGs looking at big tech? I think it's actually more of a do no harm principle, where it's these platforms, these large digital platforms are one of the few things keeping the economy going and keeping small businesses able to access their customers or reach their customers during this time. And so if anything, you want to do the opposite. You want to make these platforms more available to consumers and to small businesses. You don't want to break them up or harm them in any way. This is actually the worst time to be doing that. And so that's kind of the principle I follow for those questions.
The Hippocratic oath of regulators, right?
Exactly. I wish they had to sign it.
If there was such a thing. So Justin Owen with the Beacon Center here in Tennessee, we are a free market think tank and public policy organization. And I would just echo what Leader Johnson said earlier. I mean, Tennessee is in such a great spot to rebound from this relative to most other states because of our good policies. And so the biggest thing we can do is just to continue that trend, to provide a welcoming environment for innovation and for small businesses and startups to thrive and not hamper them with overregulation or, these attempts can be, especially the antitrust stuff can be spun as we're trying to help small business and consumers, but in the end, they have the reverse impact. They could have a very negative impact and make it hard for the resiliency that you discussed to be possible, because you make it more difficult for those small businesses to thrive with those additional regulations and onerous hurdles that they have to jump through.
Yeah, it's sort of our position, it is our position, documented at state and federal level, that American innovation companies, many of which are large, we consider big tech, right? But a lot of Constant Contact isn't big tech. It's an incredibly useful CRM, right? There are mid-tier, high-value enterprise tools for small businesses as well, HubSpot, et cetera. But the majority of attention, and therefore the majority of our conversation, focuses on the largest of these platforms: Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, et cetera. It's our belief that the vertical integration of those companies enables American small businesses, particularly, to be successful, and that their usefulness, the value that they generate as affordable, scalable, highly secure, is what largely sparked the entrepreneurial burst over the last 10 years. Because it was so cheap to start and run a business, because it was so easy to grow outside your geographic limitations or outside your conventional customer base, our small businesses, American small businesses, we're seeing a real moment, right, of growth, of leading our economy, of driving innovation. It's those same small businesses that have been hit the hardest by the pandemic because they are historically undercapitalized. It's sort of the nature of small business. Why then would any policymaker, let alone institution, want to limit or disrupt access to those tools as we're building toward a recovery, or as we're talking about building toward a recovery? And that isn't really a rhetorical question I'm asking. What is the motivation that has led policymakers to file suit, launch investigations, discuss in a very conflated way CDA 230 with antitrust and monopoly? What is it about tech that makes it this hot button on both political sides, at all levels of government, et cetera? I have an answer, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, I'll start with, I think this is in two parts. So first part on the question about, I just want to emphasize why these big tech platforms are actually really good for small businesses. And it's really important to understand both the supply side and the demand side. So on the supply side, when you're building your small business, it's actually easier than ever to start a startup, right? Because you have cloud computing to host your software and your services and reach customers worldwide. And so you can use Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, tons of other small cloud hosting providers. And the costs of that are super low on a per unit basis. And so on the demand side, how do you reach customers? How do you find customers, especially worldwide? Well, targeted advertising at Google, Facebook, and other targeted ad providers is a really efficient way to reach customers and find new customers in a way that TV advertising, radio advertising, billboards were more of a scattershot approach where you had to be at a massive scale to actually make that affordable to purchase. And so I think on the both the supply side and the demand side, this is why platforms are making it easier to start a small business or a startup than ever. So then why attack these? Why are politicians and regulators coming after these companies? I think, again, there's two answers here. One is the question of why do bank robbers rob banks? It's because that's where the money is. And so I think that we're in a pandemic, that we're facing, fiscal constraints at every level of government. They're looking for a way to raise funds for other bailouts. And so if there's a few companies that are worth $1 trillion, you think you probably can get some money out of them. And then second answer is, and this is the second answer I think is more important actually, which is it's a political speech question. It's about politics. And so undeniable that on Facebook and YouTube and other online digital platforms, there's tons of political speech and political content. And so it's become the battlefield for actually fighting political fights. And the platforms claim they're neutral, conservatives claim that they're censored or biased against. That's why you hear conversations about CDA 230, which provides immunity to any platform, digital or otherwise, to host someone else's speech and not be liable for what they say, because that person is liable, not the platform. That's not an antitrust question, that's not a competition question, but it's being brought into this conversation because what conservatives and some Democrats want to do is pressure these platforms to promote the kind of speech they like and suppress the kind of speech they don't like. And so it's really become a proxy fight for this. And a lot of people in Washington are trying to work the refs ahead of their election. And so some of this might quiet down after November when there's not an imminent election. But a lot of it is just political fighting by other means.
Alec, I really respect you using the Willie Sutton, that's where the money is line before I could get it off. It's good work. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, as Alex said, to see the left and the right sort of coalesce around this notion that these big tech companies are monopolies. I mean, it's such a misguided notion, though, that if you look at the actual data, you mentioned other forms of paid advertising, billboards, radio, TV, they compete against those too. They're not as effective anymore, but they're still a competitor to the Googles of the world. And so, I think it's just misguided to try to seize on this notion that they're monopolies. And even if they were, MySpace was a monopoly, but we didn't need government to break it up. Its users did that for it, right? And so they're constantly new entries into this market. You're not competing with Andrew Carnegie. You're not trying to build a steel factory here. The entry points are so low that people can come in and create competition. And so I think we just need to have an understanding and a real political conversation about what the role of antitrust is, what the role of the government is when it comes to these entities, and not create this notion that, the old tried and true trust busters is the way to go to solve this problem, because it's going to do more harm than good.
Yeah, I agree with all three of those points, right? There's a political angle to it, that there's a misrepresentation of what antitrust looks like, and that there is a conflation around sort of a larger component. But I am of the mind that is actually simpler than that. They have no idea what they're doing. The vast majority of our collective jobs, I suspect, is trying to explain how the internet works to people. And that for many policymakers in their 60s and 70s, this is not a world that they are familiar with. And that anything that has the power and money of a Google or a Facebook, et cetera, must be a monopoly. That kind of control, that kind of size reverberates in a very real way around, Standard Oil and US Steel. But what is lost is that that's not the world we live in anymore. Vertical integration and sort of this digital transformation means that these aren't commodities. There is no limitation on how much data can be created. Data is not oil, data is water, right? Data, the value of data is entirely what you do to it. You can heat it up and drive a steamship up a river, but too much water in the river and it floods the town. It depends entirely on what you're going to do with it. And that argument just doesn't hit when you're also dealing with noise around censorship versus empowerment or disenfranchisement or discrimination. And that has never been more clear than when 3 of the world's largest advertising companies were put on the same dais and accused of each having a monopoly while they were competing with each other. I feel like we could have that conversation with sort of Walmart and Target and the Limited all at the same time, right? Like it's always a natural monopoly. It's the nature of capitalism, and it's also the nature that those things are going to get torn down over time. I'm not in a hurry to sell my Amazon stock, but there is value in appreciating that they benefit by investing in small businesses. And since that's ostensibly what we're here to discuss today, what role should platforms, marketplaces, e-commerce tools continue to play in that investment, in the recovery, in driving small businesses through agility, through the safety net that I mentioned earlier, and through sort of lowering the barrier to adoption?
Well, I mean, tech is the great equalizer. And so I think it's up to those small businesses to decide how they want to advertise. They want to do it on Facebook. They want to do it on Instagram. Those have different consumers, right? The prospective consumers for those small businesses. So let them decide the impact of the tech firms. But if you think about it, tech being that great equalizer, you don't have to have tremendous access to capital or lots of retail space anymore to sell your products. I mean, just to give a shout out to Rock and Roll's Bakery here in Nashville. It's a cinnamon roll company. 2 Nashville musicians lost their jobs because bars have been shut down effectively since March in our city. And they said, we're good at baking cinnamon rolls, so let's do that and sell them online. And I learned about them from a friend, but then I saw an ad online, which prompted me to buy them online. I did eat too many of them in person, but all of this was facilitated because of that online marketplace that 2 musicians who just happened to be good at baking cinnamon rolls, now this is their full-time job and they're turning this into something even more. You never could do that pre-internet with that same rapid pace as they have during the pandemic. And so ultimately, I think discussions like this are important because it allows us to remember who really benefits from this. It's not Bezos, it's not Zuckerberg. Sure, they do, but so too do millions and millions of small businesses and the consumers they serve all across the country.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm glad, Jake, that you mentioned Target and Walmart in this conversation as well, because I always like to ask, we're thinking about big tech companies compared to what? And so in the Amazon case, how competitive are they? How open are they to competition? Well, if you ask any small business, how hard is it to get your product into a Walmart relative to get it on Amazon? It's night and day, right? It's only the biggest players can get their products into a Walmart store because there's a finite amount of shelf space. But on Amazon, it's an infinite shelf space, and they accept almost anyone to sell products on their platform. So in terms of being a force for anti-monopoly effect, I think it's clear that favors Amazon in that comparison. And that's true across many different tech platforms compared to traditional brick and mortar businesses. And then you also mentioned we struggle to educate legislators here in DC on how these things work. And I think that's most obvious in a recent debate over a Glass-Steagall for the internet. So when we're discussing this House Judiciary Report, Chairman Cicilline here in Washington, D.C., he's often said one of his most favorite ideas coming in the future is going to be to implement a Glass-Steagall for the internet. What he means by that is he's taking Elizabeth Warren's idea of you shouldn't be able to be an umpire and have a team in the game. So this is, again, vertically integrated platforms. You can't be Amazon and own the platform and also sell your own branded goods on that platform. And it sounds kind of intuitive in theory, but then when you kind of like break down these analogies, they just completely fall apart upon inspection. So just a real quick run through, I had to research this recently. Glass-Steagall, it's about separating commercial banking from investment banking in the financial sector. So it's about separating savings and loan activity from trading stocks and bonds, because the latter seems riskier than the former. But the reason we had that law for 65 years on the books was post-Great Depression. They wanted to make some changes. They thought that maybe this was what caused the Great Depression. It actually wasn't. That you want to separate, if you have deposit insurance on the savings loan activity, you want to separate that from the risky activity of trading stocks and bonds. We slowly repealed it over time. 1999, finally repealed it. 10 years later, we have the financial crisis. The narrative is that the reason we have the financial crisis is because we repealed Glass-Steagall. And that's what people in Washington, D.C. are trying to leverage right now. They're saying, like, bad things are happening in tech, bad things happened in the financial crisis, and that's because of Glass-Steagall, and it's become synonymous with the word regulation. And that's the limit of how much this analogy makes sense. It's literally just, we need more regulation because we think bad things are happening. Like, in tech, there's no analogy to deposit insurance. There's no analogy to making loans, maturity transformation. There's no analogy to trading stocks and bonds. It's literally a completely different business that requires different solutions. So there are problems with privacy.
A bad thing happening. That's
Yeah.
the other thing. Glass-Steagall going in after the Depression, its removal led to the financial crash, post hoc ergo Proctor hoc, that people said, yes, this is what we need. But the reality is we've never had anything like that in tech ever.
Ever, yes. And it's the most resilient sector. And banking is inherently fragile because banks only hold a portion of the loans they make out to businesses, only hold a portion of capital. And so anytime there's a risk of a run on a bank, there's no risk of a run on big tech companies. They are often accused of holding too much cash and having too much capital. And so it's completely opposite in reverse. And the hilarious part to me, as I've learned about the history of Glass-Steagall, is that it's actually also built on a myth. Like, the repeal of Glass-Steagall did not cause the 2008 financial crisis. The problem was actually in the investment banks, not the commercial banks. They were merged after the crisis to actually make them more resilient and to help recover. So it's a myth. It's a bad analogy built on a myth, and it just bothers me a lot. And that's a problem we face in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
That's government for you.
That's it. I suspect that I'll be having a number of conversations about this later today, or at least later this week, about what a terrible idea the implications of a Depression era banking regulation would be on the world's largest, fastest growing, most effective economic driver would be.
I wrote a whole blog post, Jake, so you just forward them that piece and you're good. You don't even need to go through it all.
Perfect. I'll just do that. Wonderful. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left. Let me throw this sort of an open mic for either of you. Words of wisdom, words of caution to our attendees today. Things to keep an eye on from a policy standpoint, or things that they should do to get ready for an activity.
If you're a small business, make your voice heard with your policymakers on this, because they're hearing from the other side, and that means those who want to over-regulate and improperly regulate tech because they're mad for some reason, whether you're on the left and don't like their size and power, you're on the right and you think you're being censored. Whether you believe that or not, this is not the solution. Over-regulating and getting involved in these antitrust approaches to this is not the solution. And so make your voice heard, because no one's hearing from the small businesses who utilize these platforms to earn a living and make a livelihood. And those are the people who policymakers need to hear from, because they're the ones that matter most in this discussion, but are going to be overlooked if you don't make your voice heard in that process.
That's right. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
There you go.
Alec?
Exactly. I'll just return to my Hippocratic oath for regulators. First, do no harm. And so I think right now there's a lot of potential for future harm going on in Washington, D.C., primarily at the House Judiciary level and from the DOJ, with potentially an imminent case against Google that might be joined by some state AGs. And I think it's really a misguided effort that will end up doing more harm than good. And as far as these things actually get regulatory attention, I think the cases will ultimately lose in court in the future, because our court system has a strong consumer welfare standard, and they look at these things and they need to, for the government to win, they need to actually show that consumers have been harmed by the actions of these companies. It's not enough for smaller competitors who have been harmed, because that's the nature of the competitive landscape, right? If you cut prices, that's a harm to your consumer who has to lower their prices, but it's a benefit for consumers. And so that's the model of our antitrust laws in the United States. I think it's generally effective. And so it's going to be a big waste of everyone's time if we actually go forward with these cases, because nothing actually will happen in the end. And then finally, that doesn't mean there's no problems. I think the FTC and the DOJ are under budgeted. Their budgets have fallen 15% in real terms over the last decade. They need more money to actually enforce laws that are on the books instead of changing the laws. And there are certain sectors of the economy where there are actually competition problems. I think like food processing, every few months there's a story about chicken producers or beef producers fixing prices and forming cartels, and they need to be broken up or actually have enforcement actions against them. and the hospital sector. Rising prices, massive consolidation, harm to consumers. They've been blocking some mergers in that sector, but they need to do more. And so why are we talking about tech when there are actually real problems in other sectors is a question that I have.
It's back to the Willie Sutton. That's where the money is.
Right.
Wonderful. All right, guys, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. For Nell and Kim, thank you as well. For all of our participants today, for all the attendees, thank you for taking the time. Be safe out there. Good luck. Let us know if you need more information about our recently released research, as well as the Fund Finder page at connectedcouncil.org. It's a good resource for federal, state funding programs, as well as grant programs for the private sector. Check it out if you're looking for answers on that level. And let us know if you have any additional questions. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.